There's one subject I really do know quite a lot about, and it's the setting up of brand new political parties, because I was involved in this way back in 1993 when UKIP first became established. But despite the difficulties of getting new parties off the ground in this country, there is no lack of enthusiasm out there for people to form them. And it's remarkable that last year 51 new political parties were set up and registered, and that this year in 2018 already there have been 13. Now, we don't hear much about them generally, and one of the things this show always wants to do is to try and make sure every range of opinion gets debated. And I'm interested at the moment in what's going on in the Remain camp. You remember a few weeks ago I talked to Alistair Campbell. He claimed that the Remain side weren't very active and weren't doing very much. I didn't quite believe him. Seems to me there's a lot of activity on the Remain side out there. Now, you know, I'm going to have this debate this morning, and I want you to engage yourselves in this, to ask yourselves the question, is there room for a new political party in the UK, and particularly one that has Remain, has a second referendum at the centre of its discourse? And you can engage in that by calling 0345 6060 973. You can text to 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And, of course, you can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. Well, joining me this morning is Sandra Kaduri. She's the co-founder of Renew, a new political party, recently registered, and I think you've had your first press launch, is that right?
We have. Renew was set up last autumn after the elections by a group of independent candidates, and I joined them straight after. And our proposition is basically we want to rethink Brexit, renew Britain. And we believe that we want to deliver social change for the country and address inequality, drive prosperity, but from a position of strength within the European Union.
Right, so effectively, for you to be successful with the goals of your party, you have got to have a second referendum, haven't you?
Well, we think the tide is turning, actually, Nigel. We do see that many campaigning groups, as you say, are coordinating better now. And we're tapping into a feeling among voters that they didn't know everything that leaving the EU would be about. There's now more information on the table. There are the semblance of a deal coming together. We're not even still clear what that deal is. And now that this information is available, we think the voters deserve another chance to see whether or not they agree.
OK. No, I mean, I hear that. And yet, isn't your difficulty that a few weeks ago, sitting in that very chair, was Sir Vince Cable, leader of the Liberal Democrats, who kind of pretty much said exactly the same thing that you've just said. So we've got the Liberal Democrats who want an exit from Brexit, you know, want a second referendum, and will make the same economic arguments broadly that you're making. We've got the Labour Party, you know, going through a big change in their Brexit policy. Key speech tomorrow that Jeremy Corbyn is going to make, but it looks like the Labour Party are going to be committing to us being signed up to a customs union. We don't quite yet know where they are on the single market, but it would appear, despite Frank Field and Kate Hoey warning them that there are 4 million Brexit Labour voters, but it seems like Labour are going in that direction. So why do we need Renew, a new political party, if effectively that ground is covered already?
We are a brand new party, and I think that's important that we have a clean slate. We actually have to go back to the people. Millions of people feel politically homeless. They feel politicians are out of touch. The major political parties are riven by disagreement and infighting. Labour's on the fence about the European Union. The Conservative Party are botching negotiations terribly. The Liberal Democrats have been discredited and failed to make an impact at the polls. We need something new to create a new vision for the country. We're at a critical situation now. We need to go back to the people, find out what's wrong, what's working, what's not, and what gives them hope for the future. And we are on a wrong path right now, Nigel, and we really do feel people need a new alternative so they can make another decision about where we're heading.
So who's your leader?
We have 3 leaders at the moment.
3?
I'm one of them. Yes,
3?
It's a new
how on earth are you going to get the British public to understand a political party with 3 different leaders?
Actually, I think it's a really wonderful proposition. We've got 2 of our leaders are currently out and about, a Listen to Britain tour. We're carrying out surveys to ask people what's working, what's not, what gives them hope. They are visiting universities, schools, colleges. They're going campaigning in the street. They're mobilising our 800 candidate applications for Parliament. and thousands of supporters we've got coming in, and they're campaigning now and asking people, engaging people on the real problems of inequality and division in our country and how we should address it at the national level. If we leave the EU, we will not be able to address these problems properly. Our economic growth will be reduced, and we actually feel we need to stay in from a position of strength and really talk about the divisions and inequities in this country.
So if I'm a member of the public and I meet one of your co-leaders, by the way, you better give us their names because I don't know who they are.
Absolutely. James Torrance and James Clark.
Thank you. So I'm out there and I meet one of the Jameses on the street and I say, right, new party, Renew. OK, what's your policy on the National Health Service?
Well, it's very interesting on the National Health Service. Obviously, it's been crumbling. Obviously, there's so much demand and it's not been able to be dealt with. Obviously, we're going to have reduced public money available after we leave the European Union because economic growth will go down. We've also got chronic shortages of doctors and nurses in our health service at the moment because EU nationals are no longer coming to Britain. We saw the figures the other day, reduced immigration from the EU. And we actually have the health sector very much alarmed at the moment at the increasing cost of pharmaceuticals because sterling has gone down. So we actually...
Sterling was at 144 the other day against the dollar, higher than it had been the morning of the referendum.
Well, overall, it has led to sort of higher costs for the pharmaceutical industry. And we feel that the health sector will actually benefit from staying in. Also, the collaboration, the scientific research and the medical research that is part of the cooperation with the EU will be affected.
Would you not accept that one of the things that has put huge pressure on the National Health Service over the course of the last 10 to 20 years has been the fact that our population is rocketing and that much of that has actually come from the European Union, that part of the health crisis problem that we have at the moment is because of the open door we've had to the European Union. And my guess is that the Jameses, as they're out there campaigning, are going to be met with that argument.
Well, obviously, I mean, immigration is an interesting and important issue, and it does need to be addressed properly. There are restrictions we could put in place that the EU has offered, where we could actually see that people who have not found a job within 3 months and are a burden on the health social services could be returned home. But overall, immigration has largely benefited this country, and we've seen a great diversity and skills being brought in. Businesses are currently alarmed by the reduction of numbers of people from the EU. It's enabled growth in our country and productivity. And we have to be careful about misinformation about immigration. We are a diverse society. And we are also immigrants ourselves into the European Union. Our young people are devastated. They will not be able to benefit from the opportunities of living and travelling and working in Europe.
Are you honestly suggesting that outside the European Union that young people won't go to university in Heidelberg or wherever it is?
Well, all that's up in the air, isn't it, Nigel? I mean, it will definitely not be as easy as it is while we are in the EU.
There's a very big world out there. And actually, in many ways, our young people, when they have their gap years, don't really choose Europe anymore. They choose the rest of a world that, in many ways, is getting much, much smaller. 17.4 million people voted. The biggest exercise in democracy ever taken place in this country. A remarkable result, given virtually the entire establishment, Goldman Sachs, through to, big businesses, through to political figures, senior figures, not just from Britain, but across the whole world. And despite this, in this great exercise of democracy, we voted to leave. Isn't your party an anti-democratic party if you want to overturn that?
We're actually strongly democratic, in fact, Nigel. We are actually looking for 650 candidates for Parliament, which is a huge exercise in representative democracy.
But the fact is, we had a referendum. Mm-hmm. We were told by the establishment that whichever way we voted to leave, that would be a binding result and that Parliament and the government would hold faith with the people. And here you are, setting up a brand new party that wants to go completely against that.
Well, we do want to go back to the people now that there's more information on the table. Well, it would be a first vote on the final deal. When people voted on June 23rd, they did not know exactly what leaving the EU meant. And there wasn't a proposition from people.
They voted to leave.
And actually, it was only a narrow majority that voted in favour, and some polls show that there is now a majority in favour of remaining in the EU. And with that uncertainty, it surely is not responsible for us as a country to make such a monumental and existential decision unless we know that a serious majority of the country are on side with this. There is not enough consensus right now. Obviously, the problem of Ireland was never discussed during the referendum campaign. Issues of security and our global influence were not discussed. Scotland, our major cities.
No one disagrees. No one disagrees.
Nigel,
of course, this is complex. But Sandra, the point I'm making is we did have a result. Let me ask you. I'm looking at your documentation, and you clearly had a lot of design work has gone into this, and launching political parties is not the cheapest thing to do. So what are your main sources of funding at the moment for this party?
We have multiple donors. We have a few private donors, and we have candidate donations and supporters, volunteers. All our board and our chairman and our party members have actually contributed as well. And we're crowdfunding. We're crowdfunding the Listen to Britain tour.
Have you directly or indirectly taken any money from George Soros?
No, we have not.
And would you take money from George Soros's organisations?
I would think about it. We haven't really talked about that properly at the moment. But obviously a new party does need some funding, and we will be interested in people who share our vision, who actually want to support the idea of a new grassroots movement that is actually going to offer a new vision for people and for the country, which desperately needs to come back together.
And tell me, what's been the hardest part so far?
We do have a lot of discussions in our office, our political philosophy and the way ahead. We absolutely agree on the basic premises, the need to address inequality, create more opportunity for everyone, not to leave behind people in our society, which I think the Brexit vote was about, this sort of warning sign that things aren't well. People haven't all benefited. But we also want to embrace the future, be modern and embrace the digital revolution, and actually work with our partners in the EU to address big critical problems that we're going to face. The biggest challenge, I think, is people like you, Nigel.
Well, no, not at all. That should make your life easy. I tell you what, I've got already today half a dozen callers who hate me. So, I mean, there's lots of fertile ground for you out there. But I tell you something, I promise you something. Setting up and establishing a new political party in this country is a very tough thing to do. Are you doing this on a full-time basis?
I am. And yes, several of us are now full-time. And we're obviously needing to grow the party. We need to build more of machinery to obviously deal with the snowballing support we've got coming in. Thousands of ideas and policy ideas people are sending us, how to renew their communities. And this is really wonderful. And this is what's inspiring us. Oh,
there's no shortage of ideas out there. And finally, how have you found the press so far?
The press have been very good. I mean, we've had some tricky interviews, but the masses of interest that we're getting is really good. We are the most credible new party around, out of the 51. And we found a lot of European leaders very excited about us, as well as the domestic media. So we think that's going to grow. One of our biggest challenges is information. I think the fact that we need to make sure quality, truthful information reaches people, that we're not interfered with. There isn't perhaps Russian trolling going on that is going to affect a future vote on this deal, and we need to make sure people understand what the propositions are, all the impacts of what leaving the EU means, the benefits and the negatives.
The biggest trouble you'll have is to establish a name and a face with the great British public, and I've got a recommendation for you. There's a chap out there, he's very well known, he's looking for a new political home. I think you sound like the perfect party for him. I give Tony Blair a ring, if I were you.
We're not going for Tony Blair, no, not Tony Blair.
Well, there you are, but he's well known. That was Sandra Kaduri, the co-founder and one of the three leaders of the Renew political party, a new political party, and I want to know from you, is there space, is there room for a new political party in this country, especially one that basically wants to overturn the Brexit result? You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. Never let it be said that the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show is not open to all points of view. In fact, I think actually, over the last few months, I've given Remainers a lot more time than I've given Leavers. So there we heard, and yet another new political party set up in this country, seemed to me to be really rather London-based, and frankly, with the Lib Dems campaigning for an exit for Brexit, I don't think, and particularly given their structure of three leaders that no one's ever heard of, I don't think they've got a cat's chance in hell of getting off the ground. Mind you, everyone said that to me about UKIP back in 1993. So you never, ever quite know. It's stupid to predict the future, but isn't it incredible that with the first-past-the-post political system, with all that difficulty, there were still 51 new political parties set up in this country next year. Do we need a new political party, whether it's Renew or not? Or maybe, I mean, here's a thought. Here's a little thought for you. So, Frank Field this morning is writing in The Sun and saying that it would be a catastrophe for Labour if they head towards the customs union single market route, because there are millions of Labour voters who would effectively be betrayed, and Kate Hoey was backing that up. And then you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg's group of 63 MPs saying that Brexit's not being delivered properly, and then you've got UKIP, not a strong... I mean, maybe there needs to be a great big new political party that brings together everybody that wants a clean Brexit. There's a thought. 0345 6060 973. Daniel is calling from Finchley. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. I think first, by dint of the fact you just pointed out that 51 new political parties were formed last year,
yes,
indicates that there's more than a space. There's a desperate need for a new political party. So I think the main issue at the moment is both Labour and Conservative are tarnished brands, and they're so kind of entrenched in their narratives and going more to the left and more to the right. And actually, I think if a new party was formed that was authentic and honest about kind of why we're in the mess we're in, I think you'll find, at the right end of life.
So, Daniel, are you talking about perhaps a centre party?
Yeah, I think so, because I think the reason why Blair was so successful in his time was because he took the centre ground, and invariably, I think the majority of people, it's all about that authentic and fairness. So I think the majority of wealthy people would pay a bit more on their income tax. They'd be happy to do so as long as they knew it was being spent properly, and it would help kind of bridge the gap.
So someone needs to come in, Daniel. Someone needs to come in and do a Macron. Who is it? I mean, surely it's going to need a charismatic individual to do this, isn't it?
In which case, it needs someone like you, but definitely not you, because you're too divisive.
Yeah, morning. Sunday morning, this is a gentle chat on LBC on a Sunday morning. Well, maybe I am, Daniel. But I mean, the point that I was just making to Sandra Kaguri with their three-leader system is that actually a political party needs a leader, needs a personality, needs somebody that the public can recognise and understand who he or she is. And I'm just not sure, Daniel, with this new centre party idea, this sort of British Macron version that you're talking about, I mean, is it Tony Blair?
No, because again, he's too tarnished a brand. I think what you need to set the stall out and set the policy out, and then the actual, a leader will emerge. But first of all, you've got to set the policies.
And Daniel, where would this party stand on Brexit?
My own view is that I think a lot of the narratives around Brexit were wrong on both sides of the fence. So if you have to be fair and proper about it, I think the case needs to be presented again. And if you have a look at, I think, a lot of the decisions that were made, so, the issues we've got within UK infrastructure, within our schools, within our hospitals, are because governments, whether the Conservative...
No, but Daniel, where does this party stand on Brexit? Is it for a clean Brexit? Is it for a second referendum? Because this is the issue of our times, isn't it?
It is. I think there should be, if I had to put my money on it, I'd say there should be a second referendum based on correct information.
OK, well, Daniel, I tell you what, that's why I don't think there's room for this centre party, because I think we've got the Liberal Democrats are going to say that. Labour may well be moving in that direction. I don't think, given that, there's enough space. I could be wrong. Otherwise, with Renew and all these new parties, if they're all campaigning for a second referendum, it begins to look like the Judean People's Front and the People's Front of Judea. Kathy is calling from Sidmouth. Good morning, Kathy.
Good morning.
So, is there room for a new political party in this country?
No, I don't think there is, not at national level. Mm-hmm. I'm actually leader of the East Devon Alliance, and
The East Devon Alliance, is that a party?
Yes, it is, indeed.
Right.
But we focus on local governments, local democracy. There's a desperate need for improvements in local democracy.
Oh.
Accountability.
So, Kathy, just get this straight. So unless you're part of a political party, it has to say independent, doesn't it, on the ballot paper?
It does indeed.
So when you run for local council, it's East Devon Alliance, and that's clear, yeah?
Yes.
OK, interesting. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
Yes, and what we stand for is transparency, accountability and democracy. And although it's fantastic that people get excited about forming new political parties, there's such a battle to be fought at local level where we're fighting the impact of government policies every time we're at a council meeting.
And how many councillors, Cathy, do you have across East Devon?
We got 10 councillors elected in 2015 as East Devon Alliance, and we now also have a county councillor as well.
Interesting. And do you get the feeling that people like the concept of a local political party?
Yes, very much so.
Interesting.
Because we're listening to what really matters to people locally, whether that's service cuts as a result of austerity, the massive changes going on privatising in the NHS and closing our community hospitals. These are the things that people can really see we need to be fighting about. Everything is being focused on Brexit, and I understand, of course, that's a massive issue, but that's very outward-looking, and people also need to consider what's happening locally as a result of what the government's doing now.
Isn't it, Cathy?
Another party just confuses things even more.
Isn't it a bit sad in a way? I mean, wouldn't it be better, perhaps, if we had no parties at local level and everyone stood as independents and stood on the merit of who they were?
It would be, yes, and I think, local politics does cause a lot of issues in its own way when you're applying government policies to it. But there's also the concept, of course, that you can't get away from, is that government sets things like council budgets.
Yes.
How councils then act on that tends to be party political.
Yeah, and I get it. Yes, the theory of not having political parties is very attractive, but in reality, it doesn't actually work. Cathy, thank you. Fascinating, really interesting phone call, that. James is calling from Spitalfield. James, good morning.
Good morning. Nice to speak to you.
Nice to speak to you.
I listened to that lady from that new political party. Was it Revoke or
Renew?
Renew.
Recant. That's a great time. You've just given. I tell you what. By Thursday, there'll be a new political party registered with the Electoral Commission called Recant. I bet you it. Sorry, James. Go on.
That's right. Well, I just think basically it's a good thing, and the reason is because now people that want to whinge and vote for Remain can split their votes between the Greens and the Lib Dems and Labour, and using our first past the post system, actually that harms their cause, and it's good for our cause. But the point I wanted to really make was, with first past the post, UKIP did really well in 2014 in the European elections. And the European elections are, I know they're by a different system, but...
Well, under PR, James, UKIP won. We won. We came first in the United Kingdom.
But it feels like it was about... The European elections was about a particular issue. And when it came to the general election in 2017, all the people in the north, most of them, who had voted Leave in the referendum, were offered sort of pure socialism by the Labour Party that then lied to them about their intention to properly leave the EU, deceived them, and they all just switched back to voting Labour. And it just struck me that...
So where do they go now, James?
Well, what needs to happen, I think, is there needs to be a left-wing Leave party. And I think people in Sunderland, people in Hull... If they're offered something which
James, do you know what?
Public services,
do you know what?
Leave the EU.
A left-wing Leave party would get lots and lots of votes in those northern constituencies and not a single seat. And that is the problem with our first past the post system. It makes it very difficult to get any new party established. But, James, you're right. There's a gap there. I thank you for your call. And that's the very gap that Frank Field is talking about in his article in The Sun on Sunday newspaper today. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. On a Sunday morning, there's a plethora of shows, television, radio shows, all doing current affairs and politics, and, they interview political figures, but in the end, normally, it finishes up as a whole series of journalists talking about journalists. Not so here on LBC, where the public get their chance to ring in, to text in, to tweet in, to comment on Facebook, and, I get fed through the callers and we screen them to the degree of making sure they're not absolutely mad or screaming down the phone, and then the callers come through to me. And you never quite know who it is that's calling in. somebody whose name popped up a few times was someone called Femi, and he rang in from a variety of locations, wherever he was. And then what he was doing was he was then using his side of the conversation, and he was posting videos on YouTube. And here's a couple of examples of his calls into the Nigel Farage Show. I've got a call from Vienna. Femi in Vienna. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Farage.
Good evening. What is your main reason for wanting to vote Lib Dem?
Well, having studied EU law and therefore knowing what the single market is, I know the economic effect of being out of it.
Femi, hello.
Good afternoon.
Is Blair right? Should we do a different deal with the EU on immigration and then have a second referendum?
His point, one of the points he was making today was that we can address immigration better while still remaining in the EU. And one of the issues with immigration is the fact that the government simply hasn't been, living up to its promises. It says it will control immigration, but it hasn't.
Well, obviously these videos and these calls caught people's eye a little bit, and it's all really rather bounded on. And I sort of almost think maybe ringing into this show is making this guy, and as a result of it, he set up a new pressure group called Our Future, Our Choice, and he's gaining a bit of notoriety, and he's appearing across quite a few media platforms. Femi, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Farage.
So tell me, what other media shows have you appeared on in the last few weeks?
Sky News, BBC, I was on Any Questions 2 nights ago,
And Alistair Campbell is a big fan, big supporter, I've noticed that, and he too a regular on this show. So I've got your blurb here, and I'm kind of lifting the bonnet a bit on what's happening in the Remain movement out there. We've just spoken to a new political party, and you're a new pressure group, not a party. Our Future, Our Choice is a group of angry, determined young people who think Brexit is a disaster and it should be stopped. OK, it was perfectly clear what the aims of the organisation are. How do you... it's funny, I mean, the youth situation is very interesting, isn't it? That about 2/3 of young people voted to remain in the referendum. And yet, across much of the rest of Europe, and in particular in Italy, which has got a big election coming up in a few months' time, increasingly it's the young people in Europe that are turning against the European Union, and in particular against the currency. And yet the British are going in the opposite direction. What is it, in a couple of sentences, that young people, in your view, like about the European project?
For one, it gives us a lot more opportunities, and generally speaking, we want our children to have as many opportunities as possible. And I mean, I remember that I was with people who either hadn't studied at all at any sort of university or had just finished school, and we all went and did seasonal work in hotels in France, and also being both a UK and an EU citizen, that's the only identity we've ever known. And that's what's being stripped from us. I mean, you get to still be British if we have Brexit, but you don't get the identity of being an EU citizen, which to many of us is quite important.
No, well, that's certainly true. We will not be EU citizens with Brexit, and that was clearly what we voted on. But what interests me is, I've always thought that youth movements were about having power, about the individual being able to determine their own future. And what I find remarkable is, I understand why in Italy, for example, young people don't like the European project because the currency hasn't suited them very well. I get that. What I don't understand is if we're part of it, you as individuals would have more democratic rights and more power in a Brexit Britain than you could ever have in a European Union where the system of lawmaking is fundamentally undemocratic. Why would young people support a system where the European Commission has the sole right to make legislation?
Well, for one, as for the comparison between the UK and countries like, Poland, for example, there are a whole bunch of special exceptions that are made for the UK. We don't have the euro. We don't have asylum policy, which means we're not part of the asylum policy, which means that not one asylum seeker can enter this country without our say-so.
I understand that. I'm asking you about democracy. Parliamentary democracy.
Well, this is part of democracy, we've made these choices that other countries countries don't have to make because we have a significantly more powerful position. We don't have asylum policy. We're not in Schengen.
But what we do have is virtually every single piece of our commercial lives legislated somewhere else, something over which the British voter cannot do a single thing to change any of those laws. I mean, even if all 651 of our MPs were to vote against a piece of European legislation, we can't change it.
Let's just address the notion that the EU is undemocratic. The EU legislation, as you say, is proposed by the Commission, but it then gets sent to the Parliament, which you are a member of. You personally have the power to input amendments to amend Commission proposals, which means you can take out whatever you like from a Commission proposal, you can put in whatever you want, i.e. draft law, and you are directly elected, which means you, as a directly elected member of the European Parliament, elected by the British people, have the power to completely change Commission proposals,
we have the power.
and yet you call the EU legislation undemocratic.
We have the power
that
of
doesn't
the House
really
of
make
Lords.
sense.
We have the power of the House of Lords. It is an amending chamber. But once something becomes EU law, there is nothing you as the voter or any democratic system can do to change that law. Nothing. We can't, with European law, change them at elections.
Well, at elections, you vote for the MEPs who will then have the power to change those laws.
They can't change the laws because the only way any repeal can come is through the Commission.
The Commission, who's appointed by heads of government.
Appointed
by heads of government who we elect.
Well, that's the point.
Heads of government who we elect.
Next question: EU law. You specialise in EU law. Again, youth movements always strike me as being about freedom. We live under common law in this country, as does Ireland. The rest of Europe lives, of course, under a very different legal code, where they haven't even got the basic protections of habeas corpus. Several parts of Europe where you can be left in prison for 6 months, 9 months, a year, without a charge even being brought. I would presume that you would rather we kept our common law system than move deeper into a European Union.
Absolutely, I love common law. I mean, I studied it.
So you love the EU. But you love the bits of it we're not part of.
Oh, like I said, we have a very special position within the EU framework. We have a whole bunch of exceptions which other countries don't benefit from.
So you're boasting almost this morning more about what we're opted out of than what we're opted into.
I'm making the point that we basically did Europe a la carte. We chose which parts we wanted to be part of because we have the sovereignty to do so. Now, I wanted to discuss the NHS and immigration.
Hang on. I'm still looking at the very big picture stuff here.
I feel the NHS is quite important to this country.
What is your organisation? What is Our Future, Our Choice? What are you going to do? Are you going to be an online-based campaign? Are you going to be a street campaign? What is your plan?
Both. 2 days ago we were in Hull speaking to some local people, including fishermen, and many of them, in fact, we spoke to several Leave voters who actually said, "I voted Leave. I still think we should leave. However, the government is making a mess of this deal, and
there we'll find some very broad agreement."
Yes, and many Leave voters are of the opinion that if this government comes back with a deal that is going to hurt us, we, the people, should be able to say, actually, stuff that. We don't want this.
So will you, as you did at the last election, be an organisation? I mean, you voted Lib Dem, I believe, last time.
Actually, I changed my mind. Strategically, I voted Labour, even though I'm in two minds about that now.
Okay, but Jeremy Corbyn himself, of course, has always been a Leaver, hasn't he?
He's always had Eurosceptic opinions, but I really wanted to touch on the NHS.
No. Listen. I mean, I'm sure you've got a very full group of things you want to campaign on, but I'll ask you one quick question about the NHS, which I asked the previous interviewee. Would you accept that a population that has risen beyond anything we've ever seen in this country before has put massive pressure on the National Health Service?
I'd say that EU migrants make up 5% of the UK's population, and yet they make up 10% of our doctors. So rather than EU immigration being something that threatens the country, it is literally keeping it alive. And instead of pointing out the fact that the arrival of EU migrants is helping our NHS, what did you say? And I quote, before the referendum you said, there is nothing we can do to stop unlimited numbers of EU people coming to this country and enjoying the same rights and privileges as all the rest of us.
Yeah.
And then, when I pointed out to you in a conversation that we had that under EU law, you can't come here without a job unless you have enough resources to not become a burden.
But that's never been enforced, Femi, and if it was enforced...
So who do we blame? Do we blame the EU? Do we blame the EU?
Do we blame the EU? If we started deporting people after 3 months because they haven't got jobs, you and your lot would all be screaming blue murder and saying we'd become some fascist dictatorship.
So you're saying that it'd be bad to deport people?
Do you accept?
The UK has the power under EU law.
Do you accept
to put limits on immigration?
A population rising by 500,000 every year has put huge pressure on the National Health Service.
Given that EU migrants contribute more doctors than the UK population...
So surely a country that's looking after its own strategic future, firstly it would plan how many doctors it needs, and of course we can't do that because we've not been able to predict what migratory flows have been. And secondly, shouldn't we actually be training enough nurses and doctors ourselves in this country to do these jobs?
Well, there's nothing currently stopping us from doing it, and yet still EU migrants make up more doctors than we do. Now,
I have to say, I'm very worried about. Listen, I'm afraid we're out of time, Femi. I can see
you then
massive passion
that there are restrictions that can be placed, which goes directly against what you said during the referendum.
You cannot. It is completely.
So will you admit that you lied about EU law? Will you admit that you lied about EU law?
It's unenforceable. We have a different.
Belgium enforces it. When I went to Belgium,
a different system in the rest of Europe. You have to contribute to get benefits. We do not have that link.
When I went to Belgium,
that is why
they made me register.
I know. That is why our National Health Service is a very, very different to the health service across the rest of Europe. The NHS was a contentious issue, but it's not as contentious. It's not as contentious as a whole mushrooming of organisations.
In both Belgium and Austria, I was required to register, explain my job prospects, provide a copy of my employment contract,
and try and talk through interviews. You'll find that very few people invite you back. What would you, in a sentence, ask the Prime Minister to do? She's going to a summit on the 22nd of March. What would you like her to say when she comes back?
I'd like her to say that if we can't get a deal that's going to make lives better for the British people, if we can't get a deal if we get a deal that is going to make life worse, that will either leave us less sovereign or leave us significantly cut off economically from our closest and most important economic neighbour, then I will give you a vote. I will protect you from a bad deal by allowing the people to decide whether or not this is right for them.
OK, well, there's a lot of calls for a second referendum. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. There's a host of new political parties and new political organisations springing up, and many of them are backing the Remain cause. And I'm going to keep on asking, when new political parties emerge and campaign groups emerge, how many of them are being funded by George Soros? It is a legitimate and fair question. But is there room for a new party in British politics? A new party to reverse Brexit. It ain't happened yet, so how will we know what life's like as an independent nation again, says Helena. Danny is a first-time caller from Camberwell. Good morning.
Thanks for having me on.
Good morning, Danny. Is there room for a new party, Danny?
I'm rather split on this issue because I do believe we are living in very interesting times, on parallel times in many, in every case.
Yeah.
Because we have many large swaths of disadvantaged people and people who feel disenfranchised from the political system around the country and practically in every Western European democracy today. And we've seen President Trump talk with this very same rhetoric about the forgotten men and women of the country. And so I think it is a time of the political outsider. It's a time when someone who can come from externally and can actually shake up the political system a little bit. It's a time when people, I feel, they want that, they're drawn to that, and so that's a void which has to be filled in the United Kingdom. I think the UK was filling that role, but obviously with successive leadership elections, I feel like they've slightly drifted away from that. But I feel like there is a vacuum to be filled there, and I think it must be filled by a Brexit-supporting party rather than a party looking for...
No, Danny, the government would argue that they are the Brexit-supporting party.
Oh, well, I'd say with numerous inconsistencies on the issues of the Single Market and Customs Union, despite their manifesto and their kind of power struggle within the cabinet, is distracting from the key issue and Brexit that we voted for. More fundamentally, despite Theresa May in the election saying that she would be willing to walk away and that no deal would be better than a bad deal, we're not really seeing that in her mannerisms. It seems like she would take anything that's on the table.
So you think even with Theresa May, you know, giving the speeches she gives, saying that she will deliver Brexit, you still think there's room for a Brexit party?
I think there's definitely room for a Brexit party.
Okay.
Not just that, because we're not too sure, obviously, how the negotiations will play out. But nevertheless, there is still a vacuum to be filled on the right of British politics as well. What that caller referred to earlier as a left-wing Brexit-supporting party, that's certainly an idea that would work, because that's not really a vacuum that's being filled, and certainly many people within the northern heartlands of the UK would be supportive of that. But definitely on a right, low-tax party, with one that supports low regulations, I think we have a vacuum for that too, because the Conservative Party has not necessarily filled that role.
Danny, if we had PR, both of those parties would establish a good headcount in Parliament. Under our current system, they're not going to get anywhere. Danny, I thank you. Martin is calling from Croydon. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning, Nigel.
So, is there room for a new party?
Well, I started my own political party in 2015. I stood in Croydon Central, which is a marginal seat, and I got 57 votes.
57.
A lot of people thought I would get nowhere near that, you know. But I put together my own manifesto, and a great learning experience. I'm so glad I did it. I've disbanded the party now, but I was hoping to get a philanthropist interested in my thinking. You know, funding is a big problem, isn't it? But I mean, huge. I only need one philanthropist to be on side with me, and I can make it fly from there.
Well, Martin, you say that, but and yes, money is an issue with political parties. But even if you had money, if you didn't have, you know, a clear branding that the public understood, and frankly, an identifiable leader, it still wouldn't go anywhere.
Well, I've got what it takes to be a leader. I market myself as the Nigel Farage of the centre-left.
How does that work?
Well, nobody.
You can't go out there and say, "Vote for me, I'm like Nigel Farage," can you?
Well, I can. I don't suffer fools gladly. You don't suffer fools gladly. I don't suffer fools gladly. And with you from the sort of centre right and me from the centre left, I think we should run the whole planet, to be honest.
Well, there we are. Well, Martin, thank you very much for your call. Well, I think what Martin proves is there is a wonderful, boundless, false optimism in people who set up their own political parties or run as independent candidates. It doesn't matter what history has shown them, that it's pretty much impossible in this country with the first-past-the-post system ever to break through onto the national debate, let alone win representation at any level. And yet, still people like Martin, filled with enthusiasm, go out there, and he said he was quite pleased he got 57 votes in Croydon Central. He wasn't sure he was actually going to get that many. Well, mind you, they all said the same to me about UKIP. It could never succeed, so who's to say? Tell you what, if we had proportional representation, it would change very, very quickly indeed. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC.